We're going live today. How's everybody doing? Hope everyone's doing well. I'm gonna wait till a few people get on. Today, I'm gonna be discussing the alternative to deletes. What is your option? I talked about this last live and got a lot of good feedback. Hope everybody's doing well today. It's Thursday evening. Make sure everything's working correctly. Hope everyone's doing well, as I mentioned. Let me know where you guys are watching from. Of course, we're live here in Dallas. If you guys want to schedule an appointment, we are at 4140 Langdon Road, Dallas, Texas 75241. How you doing, Sean? First one on. Got a few viewers on already. We're going to get started here shortly. As I mentioned, what is your options? What is going to be your options besides deletes? South Carolina's in the house. Thank you for joining us. There are other options besides deletes, guys. And I'm glad that everybody joined us on our last live. Like as I mentioned, we discussed deletes, why you shouldn't delete. And I was very appreciated for everybody that was actually just joining in and just kind of letting everyone know that, what I was bringing up wasn't false. There was a lot of deletes that were causing burnt valves, burnt pistons, low power performance, and it just really wasn't worth it. And I see a lot of comments coming in. I appreciate all the feedback. I appreciate all the viewers' comments coming in, especially on chat as well. Sorry I didn't get to everybody's comment on the channel. I've been trying to put some time into getting more content out to you guys and just getting everything scheduled out. It's takes some time. Detroit's in the house, San Antonio. What is a normal oil pressure on a DD13 while idling and warm? You're usually going to be around 15 psi. If you're going to have low oil pressure, if you're going to have anything that's critical low oil pressure, then you're going to have a check engine light come on. So make sure to hit that like button, subscribe if you're not subscribed to our channel. We just hit 55, I believe. I think we just hit 55,000 subscribers. Pretty big jump. Very excited about that. Appreciate it. 55,000 subscribers right now. Very, very excited about that. Kemper, Florida's in the house. Minnesota, how's the weather up there? We've been pretty fortunate to not have too much of a bad winter this year. Very fortunate for that. So what are your options? Let's get this show on the road. Let's get this show started. If you guys got any questions, make sure to hit me up. I'm going to be talking what are your options besides deletes. So if you have a truck and you have an after treatment system and you want to figure out what you can do besides a hack delete, that which we mentioned before is just a major gamble. You can risk a lot when it comes to low performance, messing your engine up, burnt valves, burnt pistons. Hack deletes are just not a good answer when they're a good solution for these after treatment systems. So what is your alternative? Okay, first I want to talk about preventive maintenance. Okay, and this is probably going to be the best option for you. Okay, now when I mention maintenance, of course we all know that maintenance is probably going to be, besides fuel, is going to be one of our biggest expense when it comes to running trucks. And you're going to have to prepare for this. You're going to have to budget for it. I would do anywhere from 35 to 40% of what's the truck's bringing in, put aside just for maintenance. Now, if you don't spend all that, that's good. That's great. You're going to have some money left over. But maintenance is the first thing we're going to be talking about. And the next thing we're going to be talking about is optimal duty cycles so that you don't have issues with your after treatment system. Okay. So as I mentioned, maintenance is what we're going to be starting with. And the first thing now it's just not maintenance on the after treatment system. You're gonna have to do maintenance on the engine, okay, which is the complete engine. Because anything upstream, any problems that you're gonna have upstreams, if your engine's not performing at its optimal performance, and of course it's gonna just go downstream. Everything flows downstream, and it goes right to the filter. So that is what we're gonna be talking about. Oil changes. Now I'm gonna be pulling up some information This is information from PSL, which is, if you have a Detroit, pretty much if you look at all the platforms, their oil change intervals are going to be the same, oil and fuel change, fuel filter changes. So they're pretty much going to be the same. The only thing that you wouldn't do if you have a frame mounted filter, which is a filter that's not mounted on the engine, that one you can do every other oil change. Now, one thing that I do see on these maintenance interval, these preventive maintenance interval tables, is they're calling for a pretty high mileage on your oil changes. Now, as I mentioned before, I mentioned this before in a few other of my videos. If you do follow a maintenance procedure that is extended, I would say, because the manuals are going to mention like 35,000 miles. Now, I don't recommend 35,000 miles. I wouldn't go more than 20,000 miles. But if you're going to do 35,000 miles, which is some of the OEM is what they recommend doing, I would also add in an oil sample. Okay, so doing an oil sample right before you do the oil change is the best time to do an oil sample, because if you do it too early, if you do an oil change, for example, if you do an oil change and say, for example, you just did it and you want to go ahead and do an oil sample, you're not going to get an accurate reading. Okay, the longer that oil is in that engine, the better reading you're going to get. So that's definitely what you're going to be looking for. If you're going to do 20,000 miles, is probably the max I would do. If you go any further than that, as I mentioned, go ahead, and I appreciate that super chat. Thank you for hitting me up with that. I really appreciate that. Thank you for hitting me up with that. So oil changes, as I mentioned, 20,000 miles. Now, this is going to go with any truck that you have, whether it's a Cummins, a Detroit, or a Volvo, PACCAR. Most of OEM is going to have extended oil changes. And as I mentioned, some of them can go to 35,000 miles. If you want to push 35,000 miles, look into the fine print. When it says where they're recommending these, they're recommending also oil sample. You're going to have oil sample intervals as well, which is going to be done right around the end of your oil changes. And the reason why you want to look at that is you want to check viscosity. You want to check really the viscosity. If you're at the end of your oil change interval and you're at if you're close to 35,000 miles and your viscosity is still showing good, everything's still showing in the green, then you can continue doing extended oil changes. But more than likely, what you're going to see is you're going to see high soot levels, which is pretty much just the oil getting dirty from the soot. And you're also going to see lower viscosity in your oil. Now, the viscosity is what actually lubricates the bearings, the internals of the engine. So that's very important. If you have low viscosity and you're running high intervals, 35,000 miles, then you don't know when exactly that viscosity got into a critical low time. So if you keep running it and you keep doing that, what's going to happen is you're going to end up wearing those main bearings out and those rod bearings, cam bearings as well. Cam bearings will wear out a little bit faster because it takes time for the oil to actually reach the top of the engine. Oil usually settles at the bottom, and it takes up, once you start the truck up, it's going to take a little bit of time to reach it up to the very top. So sometimes you can have burnt bearings as well. I see a question here about synthetic blend. Now, you can't really mix standard oil with synthetic oil. So for them to come up with a synthetic blend, I kind of feel like that's more of a marketing scheme. If you want to run extended with synthetic blends, I wouldn't do it without an oil analysis. Because even with like gear oil, for example, gear oil, you can't mix standard gear oil with synthetic oil. They never recommend you mix those. So to have a synthetic blend, as I mentioned, it could be some kind of marketing idea that they're coming up with, but I don't feel like you're going to be getting any kind of benefit off of a synthetic blend. Any of the major oil producers, kind of like Shell or Dello, any of those are going to be very solid oils to use. Anything that's over a 2007 and below, there's a API reading that basically is just the they're just kind of like the oil rating companies. And what they do, you'll see at on the label what type of oil it is, whether it's CK4, or C or FA4. That's a little bit higher. CK4 is gonna probably be your most oil that you're gonna be used for 2007s, or even 2010s, all the way up to 2014s, and it doesn't change much even if you get up into the 2017s. The only thing I would look into, like for example, Volvo is very specific on their oil, so make sure that you're using the specific oil that Volvo, especially for the newer models. You don't want to mix any of the wrong oils. If you have too much of a heavyweight oil and with these lighter engines, they're gonna create more oil leaks, especially if you're coming from a Series 60 and you used to have a DD15, or you're in a DD15 now. Those guys used to use a lot of the Mystic, which I just saw a comment about the Mystic. Now, if that Mystic is too thick, it's not going to be very beneficial. A lot of the newer weights are actually being a little bit lighter than the Series 60 oil used to use, or the Caterpillars used to use. And the reason being is just that if even with gasoline engines, you're going to see that they're running lighter oils, and the lighter oils are just so they can lubricate a little bit longer. They're supposed to last longer than the thicker oils. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're running too much of a thicker oil, especially during the cold season, I don't recommend adding any additives like Lucas or anything like they used to do with the older engines. You don't want to add any Lucas to these newer engines or any heavier weight oils, because especially during cold starts, you can definitely cause some issues with burn bearings and just cause some oil starvation on the top. Now with the fuel filters, it's the same way, especially with these high pressure fuel systems. They're all very delicate systems. They move over to high pressure, so they're running a very high pressure on the fuel system compared to the older models. The older models used to produce the high pressure through a plunger style injector. Now that's not there anymore. They're not using those style injectors. Everything is common rail. These are, most all new engines are going common rail. Besides Volvo, Volvo is still kind of making their pressure through the injector plunger. And it's still very important that you change these filters. And if you're doing them at 20,000 miles, and now I'm talking about fuel filters, that's very safe. But if you want to drain any oil or drain any diesel that you have kind of collected in your reservoir, just to ensure you're not getting any coolant or any water in there, any condensation is what I'm looking for. Because as I mentioned before in some of my other videos, is that some of these fuel stops can build up a lot of condensation. So it's very important that you're taking care of your fuel system. And like I said, everything upstream is going to go downstream. So if you're running oil that's burning, if you're having issues with long oil changes and it's burning, it's just going to work its way down to that after treatment system and cause more problems down the road. The same with fuel filters. If you're running prolonged fuel filter changes and you don't have clean fuel going in there, then that engine's going to be working harder to try to produce that power. If you're having crappy fuel going into your system, if you're having fuel filters that are clogged, you're not having the correct fuel flow going to your injectors and the actual pump and the cylinder to create that performance that you're looking for. Because these new injectors are, they're when an injector ignites, there's no spark plug. Everything is being ignited by compression, pretty much. That's why diesel engines have high compression. When the compression is to the point at its top dead center, whenever the piston comes up to its top dead center, it's just compressing all this air at a very rapid pace. So whenever you have the fuel injection actually happen, that's what makes the ignition. There's not a spark plug or anything like that. So this is why it's very important to take care of the fuel system. The fuel system also is being the diesel is being used to lubricate the fuel system. So for example, your fuel pump and the injectors. So all these are being lubricated by fuel. If you have prolonged fuel filter changes, and you have condensation or a lot of dirt going into your fuel system, then you'll have a higher chance of a fuel pump going bad. And I do see this happening with most of the newer engines, which is high pressure. Everything's going high pressure fuel systems. So those, for some reason, those pumps become more delicate. So it's very crucial that you guys are getting those done and not pushing them too far. So we're talking about fuel filters. I already mentioned that. The next thing we're going to be talking about is valve lashes. Okay, so now why is it important to do? When I talk about valve lash adjustment, I'm talking about your overhead adjustment. There could be different words that are different ways that these people, that mechanics are mentioning. They can call it overhead adjustment, valve adjustments. You want to do your valve adjustments and your Jake brakes. Now, most of the time, like the initial one, I would say around 200,000 if you're getting a new truck, or if you bought a truck that's already has over 500,000 miles, which is most of the trucks out there have over 500,000 miles. If you haven't had your valves adjusted, then I would suggest getting your valves adjusted. And the reason being is because valve adjustment is very important. Just as I mentioned, everything that's happening upstream, if it's not working correctly, it's going to just go downstream and cause more problems down the road. So if you have, why do valves go out of adjustment? Okay, I mentioned 200,000 miles at first. If you have something at 500,000 miles is usually what you'll do every 500,000 miles. But after that, I would do it maybe every 2 years, just to kind of keep it more consistent. Now, the reason why valves get out of adjustment is because if you're familiar with how a head works, there's of course a valve stem, and at the top of that valve stem there's a spring. So whenever your valves or your rockers are pushing them down over time, that's just opening your exhaust and intake. So that's basically how the engine gets its air, and of course how the exhaust leaves the cylinder, and how it seals and creates the compression. So over time, what happens, since those springs they'll get a little bit softer, or over time, so then you'll have more of a valve lash, where the rocker actually pushes down on the top of the valve. You'll start getting a bigger gap than needed, so it's not pushing that valve down all the way. Or you can have tight valves that are not allowing a valve to sit all the way, and that will cause more problems down the road. It will cause low performance, and it would also cause, of course, more fuel burning. So if you're having issues with not getting a good fuel mileage on your truck, that's another indicator of valve lash adjustment. So that needs to be done as well. That's very important. That's one of the main, everything that I'm mentioning right now is all going together with what to keep your engine at optimal performance. And we're going to talk about actually optimal duty cycles here after I'm done with all these maintenance that we're talking about already. The next thing we're going to be talking about is cooling. Okay, so PSL or most manuals are going to say every 300,000 miles. Now, I honestly feel like that's too extended. I would go every 200,000 miles, or if you can fit it in once a year, then I would do that. One of my other videos, I mentioned you can actually buy coolant strips, and coolant strips are very useful. You want to check these by sticking a coolant strip. It's a 3-way strip. You can get them from Amazon or Fleet Guard. And what you're doing is just dipping that, of course, while the engine is cold. You don't ever want to open up that degas bottle or that coolant reservoir while it's hot, because it can relieve that pressure and of course spray you, and it's very hot, so be careful. Now, what these coolant strips do is they just basically simplify that all your mixture is fine, that you have all the additives in there needed for the coolant system. Because if the coolant system is not working correctly, then of course you're going to have issues with corrosion on the internals. Now, another thing that I would like to add on to this with the coolant is that you want to be able, if you're in like a very dusty area, if you're going through deserts a lot. I know some of you guys drive through Arizona, or you drive through the desert, anywhere where it's real dirty. If there's construction workers, if you guys are working off-road, if you're working with cement, a lot of times a lot of this road grime and dirt can get clogged up into your radiator. So it's also good to get that sprayed out once a year, where you can get it cleaned out with air, concentrated air. You can get all that cleaned out, because if your engine starts running a little bit warm or hotter than normal, then that's going to cause some more problems with performance and cause more fuel consumption, and also cause anything that's causing more fuel consumption. What the engine is trying to do is trying to, for example, if the engine is sensing low performance, it's going to start dumping more fuel to try to compensate for that performance that's not pushing. If the engine needs more power, you're going to be pushing down on that throttle longer to try to compensate for that power that you're not feeling. And basically you're just dumping more fuel in there. And if things are not running correctly, if you're having an engine that's running hotter than normal, then you can still create more soot and unburnt fuel, which is going to make its way to the after treatment system and cause you to have some problems. So this is why one thing I'm mentioning. So moving right along, we talked about the coolant, we talked about the oil, we talked about valve lash. Now we're moving on to, there's externals on the engine that we want to talk about as well. Belts, that's just pretty much a given. Now belts I would inspect these once a year. If you have a truck that has 500,000 miles and the belt's never been replaced on it, or the tensioner, I would definitely replace both. Okay, tensioners are just as important as belts. These tensioners nowadays, they're going through a lot of tension. Of course, they're going through tons of duty cycle to keep that belt tight against everything. And the reason why you want everything tight there is because, of course, that's what's running your water pump. That's what's running your fan on your engine. It's running all your accessories as well. So if you have any loose belts or slipping on the belts or anything like that, you can run higher temperature than normal. Or if you have a broken belt, if you do have a broken belt, you guys all know you're stuck and you're pretty much in dead water when that happens. And that's nobody wants to be anywhere with a broken belt. These belts are not like older engines where you can slap on a new belt pretty easily. These belts are buried in there. You're going to have to take a few components off, or if you have the right tools to even reach the belts and be able to pull them off, especially for a Volvo. Volvos in particular are probably the most, I wouldn't say complicated, but they're the ones that take the most fidgeting to kind of get in there to get that belt off. If you have high mileage truck over 500,000 miles and you haven't replaced that tensioner and belt, then that's definitely something that I would look into. And a lot of times those tensioners will end up squeaking and making a lot of noise. If you do have some noise coming in from your belt, most of the time it is going to be that belt tensioner. So I'll look into that. I appreciate that $10 super chat again, Death by Dep. Thanks for sending that. If you guys got any questions or any comments you'd like to get highlighted, make sure to hit us up on super chat. Okay, so we're going to be moving right along. Air system and air cleaner. Okay, first we'll talk about the air system, which is basically the charge air system. Your intake. This is something that's overlooked very often. Guys do not replace their air filters on their truck. Either they want to save the money and not spend the extra money on the air filter. But I mean, I would definitely inspect that. Some of these engines, most of these engines that have the air filter indicator, it's kind of like an indicator that works off suction. So if it gets into the red, you're supposed to change it. I don't really go by those just because I've never honestly seen those work correctly. So, I mean, if you're in it, and this all depends on what condition you're in. If you're in a really dirty environment, then you would change out your air filter more often. PSL or most of the manuals do not basically give you an exact time to replace these. It's mostly just by inspecting them. Now, you might be able to get away with blowing it out for one time, but trying to keep it for a few years just by blowing it out, I don't recommend that. And it's very important to get these air filters replaced. Because your engine, I mean, that's basically what it's breathing. It's sucking in air. It's trying to suck in, especially at very high RPMs. You're going down the road. It's trying to suck in all this air. And if you don't have enough air, as I mentioned, whenever a piston gets pulled down, when a piston's pulling down, it's pulling in all this air. The other pistons are going up and pushing out exhaust, and it's pushing that turbo to force that air even faster. So everything's working together. And if you don't have, that air filter is actually what's connected to the turbo. So if that turbo is not getting enough air, or if it's getting a lot of dirt, first we'll talk about not enough air. Okay. If you're not getting enough air, then of course you're not going to have the right fuel air mixture in the cylinder. And of course, what's going to happen? You're going to have lower power. You're going to try to give it more throttle. It's going to dump more fuel. Now you're going to have more unburnt fuel, more chances of problems going on inside the cylinder. All this unburnt fuel is anything that's happening upstream, as I mentioned, is going to go downstream and go into your after treatment system and cause problems. So definitely change out that air filter. If you haven't changed it out in a while, if you just bought this truck and you know you're already 500,000 miles and you don't have a reference of when it's been changed, get it changed out. Air filters are very, very important. All these items that I mentioned are very important. Any of these items that are overlooked and you don't get them checked out and you don't get them maintenance, you don't get them replaced, it's like I mentioned, it's all going to go downhill. It's all going to go downstream to your after treatment system. You're going to have problems with your after treatment system. You're going to spend money on your after treatment system. And if everything is still not functioning upstream, you're going to have still problems. Okay. You can replace the filter or, get the filter clean. We're going to talk about the filters here in a minute, but get the filter service. And if you still have problems, say for example, you have a clogged air filter, or you have valve lashes that are out of adjustment, so you're just having very low performance coming out of the engine, then you're going to have the same problems over and over and over. So this is kind of why I'm starting up from the top all the way down. Another thing I want to still talk about air filters real quick is if you're in a dirty environment and say for example you have a lot of dust and sand. That sand and dirt getting into your intake it's just kind of like sandblasting the internals, and it's very bad. Okay, so what's going to happen is all that sand and all that dirt's going to get in the cylinders. It's going to get in and it's going to scratch it, just kind of like I mentioned how the carbon scratches the cylinder walls. Dust and dirt can do the same thing. It can get in there and scratch those cylinder walls, and the problem won't happen right away. You won't notice shit like after one dust storm and, oh, I got this dust in my engine and I didn't feel anything. It's still working fine. It takes time to work its way down and cause problems. The same with the turbo. I've seen turbo blades have issues with dirty filters, cause a lot of scraping on the fins. And over time, the turbo ends up getting burned up as well. So that's another thing that I like to mention on the air filters. So moving right along, now we're going to be talking about the exhaust system. Now, if you're running your truck and you see an exhaust leak, and exhaust leaks are very easy to find. All you need to look for is soot. You shouldn't have any soot leaking out of your exhaust manifold, going to your turbo, all the way down to the after treatment system. You shouldn't have any exhaust leaking out. So if you see any kind of, it looks just like gunpowder, like, just gun smoke or just smoke, burnt smoke. It just looks kind of like burnt. It looks like it's burnt. If you see any of that, that needs to be fixed. Okay. Because as I mentioned, that if it's before the turbo, that's even more crucial, because what's happening is that turbo is not getting all the pressure. A turbo runs off of the exhaust pressure. Now, that's why they're so efficient. They're actually running off of spent exhaust. So if you're not getting all the pressure to that turbo, then what are you going to do again? Of course, you're going to give it more throttle to try to make up for this low performance that you're feeling. And basically, you're dumping more fuel so that you can try to get that turbo to spin more. But if you have an exhaust leak, that turbo is not going to be spinning like it's supposed to. And what's happening is, since that turbo is not spinning efficiently, it's not building up the pressure. You're not building up the boost pressure that you need. And of course, you're going to have issues with not getting the right air fuel mixture in that cylinder, and have, again, unburnt fuel, high soot, and a lot of issues going down the road. And as I mentioned, everything that happens upstream is going to go downstream and give you more problems. The same thing with intake. Okay, if you have an intake manifold leak or any kind of boost leak, now that's from the turbo going all the way over to the intake. Most of the time it's getting piped into a cooler. It's a big radiator in the front of the engine. If that is broken, if the brackets are bad and where it's holding that on it's wore out, and that's starting to cause problems with you, that's going to cause you some problems too. If we have low power complaints, that's something that we look at as well. We have a tool that actually isolates the air to air, and we're able to test the air to air on the truck without actually having to pull it off. Now, if you have an air to air, which is basically the turbo's charging this air, is going through a cooler that's being cooled off by forced air from the engine. So as you're driving down the road, this hot air is getting blown through this cooler, which is a big radiator style cooler. And since that hot air is getting blown through there and you're having the forced air come in, that's cooling that exhaust air off so that you can actually have cooler air going into the intake, because you don't want it too hot and you don't want it too cold. The next thing we're going to be talking about is the air compressor. Air compressor is very important, especially now with some of these engines that are running with DEF that's being pumped by air. A lot of them are being changed over to a separate pump, electric pump, but some of the DEF systems were being ran by air. Some of the actuators are being ran by air, EGR actuators, turbo actuators. But with the newer model trucks, they're actually kind of steering away with air actuators because they didn't want to depend too much on the air system. But this is very important. Air compressors are like, they're small motors that are geared into the actual engine, with a piston going up and down, and as the piston goes down, it's drawing in air. As the piston goes up, it's compressing air and sending it to your tanks. Now, what you can do to service your air compressor is ensure that you don't have any leaks. You're looking at the top of your compressor, making sure it doesn't have any oil leaks or anything like that. Flash a light on it. Make sure you don't have any exhaust leaks. It's going to look as the same as an exhaust leak. So if you have, for example, a bad what do they call them? I'm sorry, I went blank. It's not a splitter valve, but it's a valve. It's unloader valve. It's a valve that's on top of the compressor head. Now, and the way that it works is whenever you have enough pressure going to your tanks, your dryer is going to send a signal back to the compressor, and that unloader valve, it's supposed to unload the actual pressure coming off the compressor, so that you're not forcing more air into those tanks. So that's basically how an unloader valve works. But sometimes those unloader valves can get stuck, and that's why you can hear like when your air purges, it's supposed to purge at a uniform time. But if you have like a purge that's like sticking, it could be the purge valve, or it could be that unloader valve on the compressor. So that's something you want to look at. And also replacing that dryer. I saw a comment pop up saying that dryers should be replaced once a year, and that's very good practice. Once a year, I would recommend not getting that replaced for more than, if you bought a truck and it's already has I'm gonna get to your guys' comments here shortly. But if you have a truck and the dryer's never been replaced, and we see this all the time. We get trucks inside the shop that are just not dryers have never been replaced, air filters have never been replaced, and most of the times, if you have a filter that has never been replaced, you're gonna have to replace that whole dryer. So it is more expensive to get these replaced if you wait too long to get those dryers replaced. So I appreciate everybody that's joining us. I just want to take a quick break to thank everybody that's on the show with us today. Make sure to hit that like button, share. If you got some comments, we'll get to them shortly. I appreciate chat. I see a lot of comments coming in on chat, so I'm going to get to your comments here shortly. I appreciate you guys all joining us. I still want to try to get this information out to you guys. Pretty excited about today's show. You can probably hear it in my voice. After treatment systems. Okay, so now we're getting to the DPFs. Okay, the DPF has a lifespan of 400,000 miles. Okay, so if you have an engine or a truck that you've bought and it's over 500,000 miles and you don't know if that filter has been replaced or not, you want to make sure to check for maintenance records and ensure that filter has been replaced. And the reason why is because now all the manufacturers are not recommending that you get these filters cleaned. They're recommending that you replace them with a remanufactured filter, because they see now that these filters are not going at the distance that they need to go when you're just baking and blowing. And if you're just baking and blowing, you're throwing that filter back on, it's not going to last you another 400,000 miles. So if you replace the filter at 400,000 miles, then you and everything else is good, all your maintenance is up to par, you're looking at having that filter replaced at another 400,000 miles. Okay, so for example, if trucks are averaging 100,000 miles a year, that means you won't have to replace that filter every 4 years. Now, that should be enough time to budget in how much that's going to cost you to get that replaced. Okay, that's definite. 4 years is enough time to budget when you're going to be able to replace that filter. But if you're not budgeting 25-30% of what's coming in on that truck towards maintenance, then of course it's going to be a little bit tough if you're just, you're only just, of course you're not budgeting for it. It can get very expensive. So on the newer models, they can go up to 500. And I'm talking about 2017 and above. After treatment systems are becoming a little bit more, they're having a little bit more longevity with the DPFs, but they still need to be replaced. They're still going to need to be replaced. If you have lights come on, indicating that you need to regen, of course, don't ignore those, because the longer that you put off a regen, the longer that soot's going to just build up into that system and cause you more problems in the long run. And if you continue to ignore those, then of course all it's going to do is just keep caking up in there, and it cause you more problems down the long run. So definitely do not ignore lights, any of the indicators showing that you need to replace any indicators that you're having to replace the filter or do a regen. Now next I'm going to be talking about, a couple more things I want to finish up with maintenance, and then I'm going to talk about duty cycles. Okay. So the last few things I want to talk about is a DEF filter. Okay. So the DEF filter is a small filter that's going to be on the driver's side where you put your DEF fluid. It's going to be on the bottom side of that tank. Now that tank is going to have a filter. It's a white filter. I would suggest replacing that. It says once a year. Which is it's good. It depends on what kind of DEF you're getting. If you're getting clean DEF, or you're not getting a lot of condensation into your DEF system, as long as you don't have a lot of contaminants in your DEF system, then once a year is pretty good. But I see guys 500,000 miles and that filter has never been replaced. And then of course, what's going to end up happening is you're not getting enough DEF to the SCR system, and that's going to cause you to have low NOx conversion. And then, of course, the truck derates because we have all these tamper-proofs on the engine, and it ends up becoming a headache. Okay, so if we can keep up with these items, then we're being more proactive and avoiding these problems. Pretty much, you're avoiding these problems. And as I mentioned on my last video or my last live, we've not only following these maintenance procedures from manuals are going to help you. We've seen it in real life. We've seen it in real time when it comes to working with fleets and seeing how they're being proactive to keep their trucks on the road. And this is what they're doing. They're not waiting for a light to come on and then changing out a filter. They're being proactive about all this. This is kind of what I mentioned about budgeting and getting these things done before any major problems can come up, because what you don't want happening is a check engine light. And now I'm behind on all this maintenance. I didn't do all the valve. I didn't do valve lash. I didn't do oil change. I didn't replace my DEF filter. I didn't replace my DPF filter. And now I'm having all this maintenance hit me at once. Now, yeah, you might go into a shop that's going to be like, oh, let me clear your codes out and do this. And then what's going to happen is you're going to have that check engine light come right back because all these other problems weren't fixed. Now, ensuring that all these problems are being taken care of upstream is going to help you in the long run, because as I mentioned before, everything that happens upstream goes downstream to these after treatment systems and cause more problems. Now, these after treatment systems really aren't that complicated if you're actually keeping up with maintenance and you're actually dealing with a shop that knows how to work on these. If you have somebody that has hack software or bootleg software, that's another thing that you need to look out for, because if they don't have the correct software to do troubleshooting, then they can prolong the actual repair and actually lead you down the wrong path. They can just delete, or not delete, but they can just delete the codes, clear out the codes, reset it, and then let you go on about your way, and you don't make it even to your next stop before the light comes back on. And if you go to the same or another shop or that does the same thing, then what ends up happening is you get frustrated and you think that, I'm not trying to read people's mind, but I'm just saying what we see is I'm going to move over to deleting the system. And deleting the system, as we mentioned, it's not a good solution. Not only is it illegal, but these hack deletes are just causing more problems with burnt valves, burnt pistons, low performance. And they just pretty much, you can look in the comments. There's guys that are advocating, do not get them deleted. I saw a comment that just came up yesterday. And he said, actually it was today, and he said he has 5 trucks, and the ones that were deleted always failed before the ones that were not deleted. So this is the best alternative than trying to delete your engine, is having a maintenance program in place. Because say for example you do try to do this hack delete and you end up having issues with your engine, and now you need a new head, you need a new cylinder. You're gonna end up spending more than what it would have cost running a solid budget for maintenance than having a down truck that's gonna end up spending a lot more money trying to rebuild this engine and having problems. So now we're gonna be moving over to optimal duty cycles, or after treatment duty cycles. I hope I can get to everybody's comments. It looks like we got a lot of comments coming in. I appreciate everybody that's on us online with us. Make sure to hit that like button if you're watching. Make sure to hit that share. If you know anybody that can use this information that might not be subscribed to us, make sure to share this information to them. I'm just sharing information on, this is basically a lot of maintenance that I'm sharing, and this is go for all engines. This go for Volvos, Cummins, and Detroits. Now we're going to be moving over to optimal duty cycles and less than optimal duty cycles. Now, as the last show, there was a guy that was that had a good fuel mileage, a healthy engine. Now, this all goes down to optimal duty cycle. It comes down to maintenance and optimal duty cycle, okay? So optimal duty cycle is basically not driving your truck over 65. I know this probably is just hell to hear right now because nobody wants to drive the speed limit. But let me just give you an idea, okay? When you're driving this truck fast and you're 80 miles an hour, you're driving it like a car, for example. If you're driving your truck like a car, that truck is a lot heavier than a car. That's common sense. This truck is a lot heavier than a car. So for that truck to be able to move up to car speed and feel like a car, it's dumping as much fuel as possible in that cylinder to create this power. Okay, so all you're doing is dumping more fuel into this cylinder to create more power. And what ends up happening is all that fuel is not getting burnt. All that particulate, you're creating more particulate matter and more soot that's going to end up getting down into that filter and causing more problems. Even if you didn't have an after treatment system, I wouldn't recommend pushing these engines that hard, because what's happening is, as I mentioned, you're dumping more fuel into that cylinder. You're creating more soot. You're creating more particulate matter. And if this carbon can build up on the top of that piston, on the top of that cylinder, and it can build up over time. And this carbon is very hard, breaks loose, and it's just like getting dirt or metal inside your cylinders, and it's just scraping up these cylinders. Once those cylinders are scraped up, then you're calling for an overhaul because you have high blow by. That compression's going, it's passing. When you scrape a cylinder, and what happens is when that injector fires, all that compression gets pushed down. And a good solid compression is no leaks. Okay, so you don't have no leaks coming by those piston rings. It's sealing the cylinder walls very, very nicely. So when that explosion happens, all that pressure is getting, all that combustion pressure is pushing all that force down on that piston. So that's where you're getting all your power. Once you have defects on the cylinder wall, scraping on the cylinder wall, that pressure that's supposed to be pushing that piston down, now it's passing through the cylinder and around the piston. So that's how you basically lose power. And of course, once you're losing power, you're burning more fuel, you're trying to give it more gas, and if the engine's trying to compensate for this low power, this low performance, and you end up burning more fuel and causing more problems. And once all these problems start packing up like this, it's not going to be an easy fix, guys. And even right now, like if you have a solid truck and you got a solid maintenance plan, stick with it, because everyone knows with everything that's going on with the economy, it's kind of a goofy situation that we're in. Some places are low, some places are high. Some freight, but in general, most freight is paying low right now. In general, most freight is low. But if you're lucky enough, you're fortunate enough to be in those high traffic areas that are paying still well, then you're fortunate. But what I'm getting at is, it's not that easy to afford new trucks right now. Most people are financing trucks, and we all know the interest rate on vehicles right now are skyrocket. So They're so high right now that you're paying 2 times, almost 3 times the amount as you would before, before these interest rates skyrocket. So this is just another reason to keep up with your engine. Now, another we're going back to optimal duty cycle. Now, 30% and above, you want to be loaded running this truck 30% of the time and above. So this is good. The more stress you have on this engine, the more times, when I say stress, I mean the more load you have on this engine. If you're bobtailing a lot, this is not a good this is not optimal duty cycle. And it's the reason is because you're not burning that fuel. It's not that cylinder's not getting hot enough. That engine's not putting in enough work to burn off that particulate matter and soot. So if you're idling a lot, that's the next thing we're going to be talking about. You want to be idling 40%, less than 40% of the actual duty cycle of that engine. So for example, if you're running that engine 8 hours out of the day, so 8 hours out of the day, you want to be able to, okay, what are you guys running a day? Okay, some of you guys are running, what is it, 13 hours a day? And I'm sorry don't beat me up if I don't have this right. Is it, if it, say for example it's 13 hours, let's just use 13 hours. So 40% of 13, that's 5. So you don't want to idle more than 5 hours a day if you're running that engine for 13 hours a day. That's just in a quick example. Okay, so it's just trying to break it down day by day so it won't be so complicated. But if you're running that truck for 13 hours, you don't want to idle it more than 5 hours a day. Okay, now that's considered optimal. If you anything above that is considered less than optimal. Now what that means is there's more of a higher chance of you having issues with the after treatment system if you're idling that truck for more than 40% of what that truck's running at a daily basis. Now if we're only talking about 1 day. That's only 1 day. Imagine on a year span. Okay, so if you're running it over 50% of the time or above 40% of the time idling, you run that over a year span, there's going to be definitely issues with after treatment systems. So one thing you can do to avoid that, and I mentioned this before, is APUs. I know APUs are pretty expensive, but if you can purchase a truck with an APU, then of course that would be ideal. So 11 hours. Okay, he said 11 hours, 40% of 11. So it's 4 hours. That's even less time. So if you're running 11 hours, then you don't want to idle that truck more than, it's 4.4. So 4 hours and 40 minutes. So almost less than 5 hours. You still want to, you don't want to idle that truck more than 5 hours a day. So moving right along, now we're talking about speed. Okay, so driving a truck 65 miles an hour, below this at the speed limit is good. Going over is not that well, but also driving it too slow is not that good. Okay, if you're not giving enough power to that truck, if you're running very slow, if you're going 40 miles an hour or below 30 miles an hour and you're idling through a port, for example, and you're doing that for a long period of time, that fuel is not getting burnt. So of course, what ends up happening, you're building up more particulate matter and more soot. It runs downstream, causes more problems to the after treatment system. So going to RPMs, you want to be running your RPMs 50% or more above 1200 RPMs, but below 1800 RPMs. Okay, so if you're running that truck all day, you want to be able to run that truck above 1200 RPMs, but below 1800 RPMs. Now that's ideal. That's ideal. Okay. Now we're going back to load, engine load, 50% or more of the time above 20% engine load. So if you have a truck that's not maxed out loaded, 40,000 pounds, which is basically 45,000 pounds, depending on what your truck weighs, you want to be able to be 50%. 50% of the time you want to be more than 20% of the engine load, which is basically that's kind of a difficult, it's kind of a tough to kind of explain that. What I would say is run at 50% of the time that truck needs to be loaded and moving. If you're moving on the highway, don't move more than 50% of the time on the highway without a load. I know you guys want to run light loads and that's ideal. But actually, these heavier loads, or these loads that are actually putting these engines to work, is helping that temperature rise and burn out this soot and burn out all this particulate matter, so it's not building up in your after treatment system, and it's actually good. And I wouldn't worry about you guys. I know that some guys don't want to wear their trailers out or wear their trucks out, but as you guys, as I mentioned before in one of my other lives, there's some trucks these same trucks are running doubles. They're running double 53s. So the truck is able to pull that weight. It might not drive as fast as you want it to. You might have to drive a little bit slower to get up those hills. But as I mentioned before, trying to get that truck to run like a car is just not ideal. That's less than optimal. I see something David asked about RPMs. Yeah, I just mentioned RPMs. You want it 50% of the time. You want to be above 1200 RPMs, but below 1800. So that's your ideal range. You want to be around that for more than 50% of the time. Now let's talk about regenerations. Now it says here 75% and above they want to be. It's ideal for it to be driving regenerations, which is, of course, that's self-explanatory. That means 75% of the time they would rather have it as a driving regen than a park regen. Now, if you don't know the difference, that's when you're driving on the road. If you've been driving on the road for a long time and you haven't had a park regen, or your truck doesn't ask for a park regen, it's because it's doing active regens. It's doing regens while you're on the highway running the truck, and that's the ideal. That's the ideal time whenever that truck is actually regen, because you don't want to run if you have to run park regens, run your park regen if your truck is calling for it. I wouldn't run a park regen if it's not calling for it, because it's kind of a headache. Of course, it's burning fuel, it's hot. But if you're running that truck on the road and you're running at these optimal duty cycles, then 75% of that idle, or 75% of that regen is going to be happening on the road. So anything out of these ranges that I just mentioned, if you want to go back and listen to all this, anything out of these ranges is considered less than optimal, and then it's definitely going to cause problems with your after treatment system. Now, I know it could be like, oh, that's such a fine line of where I need to drive my truck, but this is just to keep your after treatment system working correctly and not having any issues down the road. And as I mentioned, lost you. Sorry about that. So as I mentioned, this is going to be your best alternative instead of going and trying to do these hack deletes. Now let's get to some of these comments. I know I've been rambling on for the last 52 minutes, but I just wanted to get all that information out to you as possible. We had just people checking in at the beginning of the show, of this. A lot of people on chat. I appreciate everybody coming in. Speaking of low pressure, the O-rings on the DD15 went and blew my motor. Now waiting on MPF to fix it. Yeah. So Sean says he has low oil pressure, or he had low oil pressure on his DD15. That's, the maintenance that I mentioned is going to be after treatment system and of course your engine. But if you know that other problems are happening, like for example, O-rings on your DD15 oil pickup tubes, that needs to be done. If you know it hasn't been done before, get it done. I would probably get it done I would say you don't need it done after you get it done once, but if you need to get it checked out, keep an eye on your oil pressure. I'm guessing you didn't have any kind of indicator that happened. It had 590,000 miles, so that's what I was about to mention, around about 500,000 miles. Did you get any indicators whenever your oil pressure dropped and it blew your motor? Because usually you're going to get an indicator. Like say if you come at a stoplight, usually you'll get like an alarm saying you have low oil pressure. That's usually how we see them. What else we got here? Hansen says from Nebraska, look what California is doing. This sweep across the U.S., large amount of trucks being sold from California. California is definitely out there. They're just not letting newer trucks in from 2009. I mentioned that earlier, or at our last one, and I don't like that. but I don't feel like the whole nation is gonna adapt them so quickly. But I don't feel like after treatment systems are going anywhere. That's kind of why I like sharing this information with you guys, so that you can have an idea on how to take care of this system and not turn around and get this hack delete and end up having to get another engine because your engine ended up messing up because of these hack deletes. I got a question here. Chicago here. Do you know what can it be in my truck when the air compressor stops pumping? The truck starts at idle. Air compressor stops pumping. The truck starts to idle rough. If the air compressor, as I mentioned earlier, I would check your unloader valve, which is on the top of the compressor. If it hasn't been replaced, Bendix, mostly it's going to be a Bendix air compressor. I'll have to look back up in their manuals, but I believe that they recommend that being replaced like every 2 years, and the dryer once a year. Sometimes it could be the purge, the governor as well is something else that could be acting up. Most of the time, if it's a purge valve, if it's a instead of having like a solid purge and it's and you haven't had that I hope you guys like that sound effect. If you haven't had the compressor or the air dryer replaced, then I would replace it as a complete unit. Get the unloader valve replaced, and also replace that governor. I hope that helps. Love what you do, man. If I didn't live in Kentucky, I'd try to come work for you. I appreciate that. Yeah, we are hiring. I'm glad that you mentioned that. I'm hiring. We are hiring we're hiring experienced service writers at our location, which is basically somebody that can help us communicate with the customers. Our technicians are the ones doing a lot of the inspections. So when you come in, say for example, you have an issue with your truck, we do a complete inspection, a digital inspection. We send it to your phone so you can see the photos and all that. We work on your original complaint, but we also let you know everything else. So a service writer would be that middle person that's communicating to the customer and the actual technician, so that we can make things a little bit smoother. So we are hiring, guys. If you guys are interested, I want to grab this comment here. You say here that they're easy to rebuild, which are dryers. Now, okay, you can try to rebuild a dryer, but if you had a dryer that's been on there for 500,000 miles, trust me, it's going to be less of a headache, and you're probably going to end up having to replace that dryer anyway if you just buy all the internals and try to replace that dryer. Now, if you had a dryer that's been recently replaced and you have a purge valve sticking, then yeah, I would say, hey, you know what, rebuild it. But if it's a dryer that's been over in that truck for 500,000 miles and you're trying to rebuild it, trust me, I've tried to rebuild them. We've tried to rebuild them, and it's a waste of time. You're gonna put all that crap back together. It's gonna either be worse, or it's gonna leak. It's gonna end up having problems, or you might not even be able to get all the parts off. You're gonna end up spending half the day trying to get all the parts off. You ever see those clips, those memes of people working on stuff that says, me 3 hours into a 30-minute job? You know, that's basically a good example for that. Now, you can try it. You don't have to listen to me. You can try it. You can try to rebuild your dryer, but I'm going to tell you, sometimes they can be a headache, especially if they've never been replaced. A filter on the dryer can be seized, and you can't get them off to save your life. You know, sometimes you have to replace the whole dryer, and that's kind of why it's very important, if you have a new dryer, get those filters replaced every year, so you don't have to replace the whole dryer. But a lot of these trucks don't have dryer filters that have been replaced yearly, so you'd have to replace the whole dryer because all the corrosion. They're very tough. Moving right along, we had a question about synthetic. I think I covered that earlier. The synthetic blends, I'm not really a big fan of. Whatever oil you decide to run, make sure you're running API certified oil. If you're running anything that's 2017 and above, or 2007 and above, you're gonna need CK4. And let me double check here when it comes to oil. We were talking about oil earlier. CK4 is probably the newest oil right now. I think that's the highest oil that you can get right now. It might be one a little bit A little bit higher than that. Let me double check. We might have one that's a little bit higher than that. Here we go. Oil requirements, filtration, oil requirements. Okay, so there's CK4, FA4, CJ4. Now, all these different CI, like CI4 plus, these CI4 plus, these are for newer model engines. If you're running a CJ4 is a good engine, a good oil. I think CI4 was for, those are for older engines. So CK4 is going to be probably the engine oil that you're going to be using. Double checking your manuals. These oils are changing because of the difference of how these trucks are running. So you got more back pressure, you have more issues, you have more problems going on with your not problems, but you have more back pressure, which is going to create more heat in the engine, and it's also going to create more soot and particulate matter. So this is all things that you need to consider. Running a good oil sample is definitely what I always recommend. Let me move right along to, let me go back to these comments. Where was I at? Oh, we got a lot of comments coming in. Appreciate everybody that's joining us today. A lot of comments here. All right, here we go. Weight of oil. Make sure you're checking the right weight of oil. You don't want to use the wrong weight. You don't want to go with a heavier oil. As I mentioned earlier, heavier oils are not good for these newer engines. BD15 just got 500,000. Should I switch from a 10W30? Now, that's a good question. DD15, they not recommend, but let me see here. Both of those oils are considered they're considered good oils. So you can use I had a question here. He's got a DD15. He's using 1540. He says, should I switch from 1030 to 1540 or stay with 1030? You can run 1540 or 1030 on a DD15, as long as it's CK4 and above, okay? API certified CK4 and above. You can run 10W30 or 1440. If 10W30's been doing you good, you don't have to change it. You don't have to change it. You know, I don't think you would get any benefit out of it. You wouldn't see that big of benefit. And what are your intervals? I'm interested. No oil leaks, no intervals wrong. If you're changing every 15, you could probably go 20,000. But if you're doing 10 to 15,000, it doesn't matter what oil you run. 1530 or I'm sorry, 1030 or 1540. It doesn't matter. But I appreciate that question. I mean, Mystic, I see a question I'm hearing about Mystic. Mystic might be too thick of an oil to run, and especially if they're saying it's synthetic blend. If you want to stay with the synthetic blend, that's fine. As I mentioned, get your oil samples done though. Make sure your oil samples, and also check on the bottle. There's going to be a sticker. It says API. Now that's the oil. That's how they register oil. That's how they rate the oil. Okay, so if it's CK4 and above, that's a good oil. Okay, but if it's not CK4 and you got a newer engine, then you might be running an oil that's not recommended for that engine. So what's the point of a synthetic oil? They sell recommended 30K if you have to change it anyway, around 15,000. And all filter. That's basically what I was mentioning. You could try to run 30,000, and I guarantee if you see your oil sample, you're gonna see high soot levels, low viscosity, and it's just risky. You know, you can maybe go 20,000. 15,000 is a good miles. If you want to go over that with your oil samples, that would give you a little bit more security to kind of figure out how high you want to go. But that's good. I know there's a lot more questions coming in. Let me try to catch the newer ones. I read 2020 DD15 owner's manual. All right, we got a super chat here. Appreciate this. I love GK, or I love KG. My oil PSI on the DD15 sits at 12 to 13 when idling and warm. Should I be worried? I've already replaced the O-rings and the pickup tube. If you've already done the O-rings and pickup tube, that that is usually around like the way that I kind of decide or I remember on the DD15s and the DD13s is it's running about the displacement. So a DD13 is going to be running around that. It should be more about 15 psi's at idle. If you have those O-rings and pickup tubes replaced, you shouldn't have had to replace the pickup tube, but you should have to replace the oil manifold. Those are made out of plastic for some reason. Have you had an engine light come on that warns you that you have low oil pressure? If you had an engine light come on that lets you know you have low oil pressure, then definitely I would look into it. The oil pumps are usually pretty solid pumps. They're gear driven pumps. They don't really go out. It's mostly the manifold and the O-rings. But if you've had those replaced and you still have if you still have low oil pressure, I'm wondering if if damage has been already done. Are you getting any lights that you have low oil pressure? If you do have internal damage, you might have to get mains done, but I would have them inspected first. And that would be just pulling a main bearing cap, and a rod bearing just to kind of see if they're worn. If they're excessively worn, then you may have to get those replaced. If you're getting an engine light, another thing you can do for this, is just to get an oil sample. An oil sample is going to show if you have excessive metals in your oil. If you have excessive metals, there's certain metals that these bearings are made out of, and they're going to show up in oil samples. And when you get an oil sample done, you could probably look for an oil sample a lab online, and they can mail you the tube, the bottle, and you just put your oil in there and send it off to them, and they can send you a report. But if you have main bearings or rod bearing problems, then you're definitely going to have you definitely can have some problems there. But if your engine light's not coming on, you might be okay. You know, I want you to be able to sleep well, but if your engine light's coming on saying you have low oil pressure, definitely be worried about that. 13 psi. I want to say that DD13s need to be at 15 psi. I want to say, because I know DD15s are at 15 psi. Let me double check here. And here in a manual here, I want to say that's right around oil pressure drops. All right, you've already did the oil pickup tube. You know what? That's normal. That looks like that's normal. And as I mentioned, you're gonna have an engine light come on if your oil pressure is in a critical state. So you should be all right as long as you've had that done. No warning lights. I just wanted to avoid any problems. Yeah, you should have a warning light if your engine gets to a crucial level where it's gonna be. If once it's warmed up, if it's dropping any lower than that, definitely get the mains looked at. But you should be good. Let me go back to some of these. I see a lot of guys advocating deletes, but we talked about what deletes can do. It's a big gamble, guys. I say financing APU is a good way to start your commercial credit history. Okay, I didn't know that's a good idea. I drove my 2016 glider with a Series 60 in it and got the best mileage at 68. So he's got a 60 series or Series 60 glider. And he says that he's driving at 65 miles an hour. Never trucks get way better at 55. So he's getting good fuel mileage at 68, which is good. And that's interesting that you brought up gliders, because I've read that the manufacturers actually stopped selling chassis to the glider companies. So gliders are going to be pretty much extinct. They stopped selling the chassis, the nice chassis, over to the glider people. I appreciate everybody that's joining us. I think I'm going to wrap this up. I've been on for an hour already. What do you think about Freightliner batteries? That's another good comment there. Definitely check your batteries. I would recommend replacing your batteries once a year. I know that might seem a little bit excessive, but usually those batteries are getting pretty beat up, and after going through a cold winter, you don't want to try to get through another winter and get somewhere where you can't start that truck. We usually recommend replacing your batteries every year. but you can also buy battery test load battery. You can have them load tested, and that load test is going to tell you the actual condition of those batteries. Make sure your connections are solid everywhere. Make sure your connections are clean and solid everywhere, all the way up to your starter, because a loose connection at your starter, a loose ground on your batteries, any loose connection right there will cause issues, cause performance problems, and can have your truck shut down on the road. Yeah, they have. Oh yeah, about 2 years ago. Okay, so I'm a little behind. I know that. They stopped selling the chassis to the actual builders. I appreciate everybody that's joined us today. Thank you guys for all coming in and giving us all your comments. I apologize that I didn't get to everybody's comments. I'm going to be working on getting to guys more comments, but most of this show I was just trying to get all this information out to you guys so I wasn't missing anything. Again, appreciate everybody that's joined us tonight. I'm going to be having another video that's being released on Sunday. It's going to be coolant in your fuel system, what we found into this particular truck, and then what you can do to see if you have coolant in your fuel system. So make sure to check that video out. Let me know when you guys would like me to go live again. I'm going to be going live another probably, I wouldn't say Saturday. I'm trying to figure out a good schedule, but at least Thursday nights I'm going to be going live, and I would like to go live again at least one more time. But I want to do it when after these videos are being released. So guys, if you got any ideas on what you would like me to what videos you'd like me to cover, give me some ideas. I'm going to be going on live again. See you guys soon. Be safe out there. Make sure you guys are driving safe, following the rules.